Now that I've created the wireframe and surface model for this part, I'll go back to the project page and I'll scroll down to the instructions that are given to us. We just completed step 4, and now we're moving on to step 5. It says use the create plane tool that is found in the planes manager to create planes for each surface. We're going to need to create a plane for each surface, and then we can create the letters that are on those surfaces. So it could be a process. I'm going to actually combine these two steps, and that way you guys can see me doing this process several times as opposed to creating all the planes and then creating all the letters. Inside of Mastercam, I'm going to make the front plane level, the active level. Anything we go or anything that we create goes on the active level. And what we're going to do is we're going to create the label that goes on the front plane. This label right here. I'm going to set the wireframe color to white, and then we'll be able to see what the we'll see the font or the letters a little bit easier with the background color of the surface. Now, something I noticed, I didn't quite follow the colors that were being used on the project. If I wanted to change the color of the surfaces, I could select all surfaces. So I've got my surface, or I have my selection filters on the right side of my screen. Right here, this icon is to select all surface entities. With them selected, I can go to the Home tab, and under the surface color, expand this, and then select this color right here. I'll hit escape, and these colors are now yellow. Or I'm sorry, these surfaces are now yellow. I set my level to front plane. I'm going to set my wireframe color to white. And I'm going to create a construction plane or a WCS on this surface. To do that, I'll need to make the planes manager visible. Go to view, and in the manager section, if planes is not selected, select it. That makes the planes manager available to us on the left side of our screen. I'm going to create a new plane based off of geometry, based off of this surface right here. Once again, look at it from an isometric view. So right click, isometric. And if it's laying down in a strange way, make sure that your C plane and T plane are set to front, or select top here and then hit equals, and then right click, isometric. So select top. Your construction plane and your tool plane should be associated with the top, and then right click, isometric. This is the face that we're going to call the front. I'm going to create a coordinate system based off of this surface or associated to this surface. In the planes manager, you'll see the green plus sign. If you expand it, we're creating a new plane based off of several options. In this case, I'm going to use from geometry. So I'll select from geometry. Mastercam is prompting me set construction plane by geometry, select an entity. If I select this surface, you'll see a coordinate system appear centered or closely centered to that surface. And when you create a coordinate system on a surface or a solid face, Z will always be perpendicular to that face. And in this case, I'm just scrolling through the different options. The first option that was given to me is the one that I want. And you can see that the X is going to the right, the Y is going up, and the Z is actually coming out of the part. And that's what I want. So once you have the correct orientation, select OK. It creates that coordinate system, and then the parameters for that coordinate system become available on my screen. I'm going to start by giving it a name, and I want to name it something similar to what we have here. Now be careful, front plane might conflict with the front here. So I'm going to call it, and actually I just lost it. There's my new plane tool. Let's call this front plane. And once you name it, scroll down. I'm going to check set as WCS, T plane, and C plane. And I'm also going to reposition it. Right now it's centered on the selected face, or close to center, I should say. If I select reselect, and I move my cursor into the graphics area, you see that coordinate system now attached to my cursor. And if I position my cursor here, you see it lock into position. I left click. And now I have the new coordinate system attached to the part at the lower left corner of this face. I've got it named front plane, and then I'll select OK. The next thing I'll do is I'm going to draw in some construction geometry. This is going to help me position that label. If I go back to the project page, let's see, it says letters are 1 inch tall and centered on each plane. Use Mastercam box font. And then we're going to place the labels like you see in these different views that are provided. We're working on the front plane for the front label. So with the new plane set to the current construction plane and current tool plane, I'm going to go to wireframe. And I'm going to go to letters, create letters. For the style, I'm going to set it to Mastercam box font. The height, the default height is 1 inch. And then for the letters, I'm going to type in all caps front. And when I hit enter and move my cursor into the graphics area, that's not getting me a preview. So what I'll do is I'll click off of the part. And you can see those letters are created and they're planar with this face. They're not sitting on the face, they're just planar with this face. From here, I'll select OK. I'm going to draw in some construction geometry. Ultimately, I'm going to delete this construction geometry. I'm going to draw in a line from the midpoint of this edge to the midpoint of this edge, and that'll give me a midpoint to lock onto so that I can reposition my letters. I'll go to wireframe, line endpoints. I'll let my cursor lock onto the midpoint of this edge and then the midpoint of this edge. Make sure you're set to a 3D construction plane. Once you have that construction line placed, select OK to exit the tool. To move the letters to the center of this line, I'm going to use the transform tool. I'll go to transform, translate. Mastercam is prompting me to select entities to translate. I'll Windows select the letters. When they become selected, they change to this yellow look or this yellow appearance. I'll select end selection. And in the parameters for the translate tool, I'm going to use the vector from to reselect, not the selection reselect, but the vector from to reselect. I select reselect. You'll see a point centered at the selected geometry. Let your cursor lock onto the point. I zoom in and it's not letting me lock onto it. Reselect. Well, that method's not working. I'll hit escape. So with the new version of Mastercam, this tool has changed a little bit. I'll just select this triad, and then I'll let it lock onto the midpoint of this line. And that's not working either. I'll hit escape. I'll go to transform, translate. I'll select the letters. I'll select end selection. I'll select the triad. I'll lock onto the point, and then I'll lock on to, it's not letting me do it. Reselect, it's not letting me do it again. 1 second. So the new transform tool was not functioning the way that it functioned with the last release of the software. So I'm going to try something different. I'm going to go to transform, translate. Next, I'm going to back out of this tool again, hit escape, transform, dynamic. We're being prompted to select the entities to move. So I'll window select my letters. I'll select end selection. Now I have this axis control attached to my cursor. I'm going to start by placing it at the center of the selected geometry. This little icon right here identifies the center of the selected geometry. Let the axis control lock onto it, left click, and then left click on the sphere in the center. When you highlight over it, the sphere changes to the color yellow. When it changes to the color yellow, left click, and now the geometry is attached to my cursor. Position your cursor next to the midpoint or on the midpoint of that construction line, left click. Make sure that the method is set to move and then select OK. At this point, I can delete the construction line, select it, hit delete. And then if I right click, I can clear the colors and then the letters take on the assigned white color. From here, I'll look at it from an isometric view. And the isometric view is relative to the current construction plane. So I'm tumbling my view again, and I'll just leave it the way you see it. I'm now going to go back to the project page, and I'm going to create the R side label. And before we do that, we'll need to create a coordinate system and some construction geometry. Back inside of Mastercam, inside the plane manager, so go to view planes. With the plane manager visible, we're going to create a new coordinate system based off of existing geometry. Expand, create a new plane, and you see create from geometry. I'll select this face. You'll see a preview of a coordinate system appear on that face. The X is pointing to the right, and then the Y is pointing up, and then Z is pointing straight out of that surface or perpendicular to that surface. This is the option that I want. If you don't see your coordinate system in this orientation, scroll through the different options until you get to this option right here. X is pointing to the right, Y is going up, and Z is coming towards us like that. Select OK. In the name, I'll call this R side plane. The set as is already set to WCS, T plane, and C plane. And to reposition it, once I have the orientation set, I can reposition it with the reselect icon. And I'm going to place it at the bottom left corner. From here, I'll select OK. I'll now need to create some construction geometry. I'm going to draw a line from the midpoint of this edge to the midpoint of this edge. I'll go to wireframe, endpoint. I'll lock on to this midpoint, and then I'll lock on to this midpoint. I'll select OK to exit the tool. I'm going to go to the level manager, go to levels, make the R side level the active level. This is where I want the R side label to reside. So we create a new coordinate system. We've created our construction geometry. When we made the R side label the active level, go to wireframe, create letters. The style is already set to Mastercam box font. For the letters, we'll call this R side. And I'll set it to all caps. I'll left click off of the part to create the label, and then I'll select OK. I'm now going to use the dynamic transform tool to reposition this label at the midpoint of this line. I'll go to transform, dynamic, Mastercam is prompting us to select the entities to move, so I'll window select my letters. I'll select End Selection. You can see the axis control or the gnomon attached to my cursor. I'm going to lock on to the center point of the selected items. Left click. And then I'm going to select the sphere. When the sphere changes to the color yellow, left click on it. And now it's attached to my cursor. I'll position my cursor close to the midpoint of this construction line. When I see it lock into place, left click. And then I'll select OK to exit the tool. I no longer need this construction line, so I'll select it. I'll hit delete. And then to clear the temporarily assigned colors, I'll right click on the screen and select clear colors. From here, I'll go back to the project page. And I'm going to reference this image down here. I'm going to work my way up around the part on the vertical surfaces. So we had front, our side, and now we have back. So you can see that the image here has been rotated 90 degrees from the default isometric. So our side is now here, and then this side will be the back. I'm just tumbling my view. I'm going to create a plane on this face, and I'm going to place the back label on this face. I'm going to make the back level the active level. I'll go to the Planes Manager. The bottom of my screen, bottom left, you'll see planes and levels. I'll go to the Planes Manager. I'm going to create the back plane. New plane from geometry. Select this face. Now this time the orientation of the coordinate system is a little different. I'll scroll through the options, and this is the one I'm looking for. So X is pointing in this direction, Y is pointing up, and then Z once again is pointing outboard. Once you get it to the correct orientation, select OK. For the name, we'll call this one back plane. To reposition the coordinate system, I'll select Reselect. Move my cursor in the graphics area, you'll see the coordinate system attached to my cursor. At this point, I can lock onto the lower left corner of this face. Back plane. Currently set as WCS plane and C plane. I'll select OK. We created the plane or the coordinate system for this surface. I'm now going to create some construction geometry. I'll go to wireframe, line endpoints. I'm letting my cursor lock onto the midpoint of this edge and the midpoint of this edge. I'll select OK to exit the line tool. From here, I'm going to go to wireframe, create letters. If I reference the image on the project page, it says back. So type in back, all caps. And I'll left click off of the part to create the letters. Once you create the letters, select OK. We're going to use the dynamic translate tool to move this label to the midpoint of this line. I'll go to transform, translate. I'll select the letters that I want to move, end selection. And I'm using the wrong tool, so I'll exit out of here. Transform, dynamic, made a mistake, transform, dynamic. Once again, I'll select the letters that I want to move, end selection. You'll see the center point of the selected items appear. And I'm going to lock my cursor onto that center point. When I see it snap into position, left click. And now I'll position my cursor over the sphere when it changes to the color yellow, left click. And now I can move my mouse to the midpoint of this construction line. When it locks into position, left click, and then select the green check. At this point, I'll delete the construction line, select it, hit the delete key on your keyboard, and then to clear the temporarily assigned colors, right click, clear colors. So I'm going to keep repeating this process to create all of the labels. We have 7 more to go. I'm now going to create the left side. I'll make the L side the active level. I'm going to create a plane for this surface. I'm going to create it from geometry. So new plane from geometry. I'll select this face. The orientation isn't correct, so I'm going to change the orientation until the X is going to the right, Y is going up, and then Z is coming towards me. I'll select OK. We'll call this one L side plane. To reposition it, I'll select reselect. And then I'll place it at the lower left corner of that face. From here, I'll select OK. I'm going to draw in some construction geometry, wireframe, line. I'll lock onto the midpoint of this edge, the midpoint of this edge. I'll select OK to exit the tool. We'll create some letters. I'll go to wireframe, create letters, all caps, L side. Left click in the graphics area off of the part, it creates the label or the letters. I'll select OK to exit the create letters tool. I'm now going to move these letters. I'll go to transform, dynamic. I'm going to select the items that I want to move. Once they're selected, I'll select end selection. I can see the center point. The triad is attached to my cursor. I'm going to lock onto the center point, left click. I'll position my cursor over the sphere. When I see it change over to the color yellow, left click. The letters are now attached to my cursor. I'll position my cursor by the midpoint of the construction line. When I see it snap into position, left click. And then I'll select OK to exit the tool. I'll select the construction line. I'll delete it. Right click, clear colors. So I've created the labels on the vertical surfaces. I'm now going to tumble the view so that I'm looking at the front surface right here. And I'm going to create a plane on this face. If I go back to the project page, the label on this face will be 1. Go to the level manager. Make level 14 or level 1, the level named 1, the active level. And then I'll go to the planes manager. I'm going to create a new plane from geometry. So I'll go to create new plane from geometry. I'll select this face. I see the coordinate system appear. I like the orientation. X is going to the right or going to the right side. Y is going up and then Z is coming out. I'll select OK. I can reposition it with the reselect icon. Now you can place it anywhere you need it to be. For this example, I'm going to place it right here. Left click. I'll select OK. I'll draw in some construction geometry from the midpoint of this edge to the midpoint of this edge. I'll go to wireframe, line endpoint. I'll lock onto the midpoint of this edge, the midpoint of this edge. I'll select OK to exit the tool. I'm now going to draw the label 1. I'll go to wireframe, create letters. I'll call this one 1. In the graphics area, I'll click off of the part. And you can see that the letters are planar to this face. I'll select OK. I'm now going to use the dynamic translate tool to move these letters to the midpoint of this line. Transform, dynamic. I'll select the letters. I'll select end selection. I'll let my cursor lock on to the center point. And then I'll position my cursor over the sphere. When it changes to the color yellow, left click. Now the letters are attached to my cursor. I'll let my cursor lock onto the midpoint of that construction geometry, left click, and then I'll select OK. Delete the construction geometry, select it, hit the delete key, and then clear the colors of the transformed geometry. Right click, clear colors. I'll reference the project page. To the right, we have surface 2 or label 2. I'll create a new coordinate system. And before I do that, I'll go to levels. I'll make level 15 or the level named 2, the active level. And then I'll go back to the planes manager. I'll create a new plane from geometry. I'll select this angled face. You see a coordinate system appear. I like the orientation. So the text that we create is going to read left to right. So look at the beginning or the origin of the x-axis and then follow it. So if it's going to the right, that's how our letters are going to read. If you're not seeing the orientation that you need, you can scroll through, just hit the arrows. And once again, I want the x-axis pointing to the right and then the y pointing up, and z is coming towards me. I'll select OK. That's the correct orientation. We're going to call this one 2 plane. To reposition it, I'll select reselect. I'll lock onto the lower left corner of this surface. And then I'll select OK. I'll draw in some construction geometry, wireframe, line endpoint. I'll lock onto the midpoint of this edge and then the midpoint of this edge. I'll select OK to exit the tool. And then we'll go to wireframe, create letters. This will be 2. I'll click off of the part. That places the letters. I'll select OK. We need to move the letters, so I'll go to transform, dynamic, select the letters that we just created, select end selection. Lock your cursor onto the center point. Select the sphere. You'll see the letters attached to your cursor. Now let your cursor lock onto the midpoint of that construction geometry. Left click, and then select OK. From here, I can delete the construction geometry. And to clear the colors, I'll right click and select clear colors. I'll tumble my view. We're now going to place the label on this surface. If I reference the project page, 2 back, left side 3. 2. Let's take a look at that. I've got my orientation messed up. So 1. Interesting. So I got these positioned incorrectly. I'm going to move forward and I'm going to name them. I'm going to call this one 3. I'll call this one 4. This will be top and this will be bottom. I'll come back and fix it later. But for this demonstration, you're going to Actually, I'm probably just going to leave them like you see here because this makes more sense to me. 1 front, 2 right side. So we're going to place 3 here. This will be 4, this will be top, and then this will be the bottom. I need to create a construction plane on this face. Before I do that, I'm going to make 3 the active level. I'm going to create a plane from geometry. I'll select this face. The orientation isn't working for me, so I'll scroll through the other options, and that one works for me. X is pointing to the right, Y is pointing up, Z is pointing away from the part. I'll select OK. To reposition it, I'll select reselect. I'll let my cursor lock on to this endpoint. And then I'll select OK. I'll draw on some construction geometry, wireframe, line endpoints. I'll lock on to the midpoint here, lock on to the midpoint here. I'll select OK. I'll create the next label, label 3. So I'll go to wireframe, create letters. This will be called 3. I'll click off of the part. I'll select OK to exit the create letters tool. Now I need to move these letters. I'll go to transform, dynamic. I'll select the letters. I'll select end selection. I'll let my cursor lock on to the center point. I'll select the sphere. The letters are now attached to my cursor. I'll lock on to the midpoint of the construction line. I'll select OK. I'll delete the construction line, and then I'll right click and I'll clear colors. I can fit my screen and I will save my work. From here, we'll move on and we'll create the label for this angled surface. I'll go back to the level manager. I'm going to make the named level 4 the active level. In my case, it's number 17. It's named level 4. I'm sorry, the name is 4. I'll go back to the plane manager. I'm going to make a construction plane or a coordinate system based off of this surface. I'll go to create a new plane from geometry. I'll select this angled face. I'm going to change the orientation. X is pointing to the right, Y is pointing up, and then Z is pointing out of the surface. I'll select OK. I'll rename it. I'm going to call this 4 plane. Interesting. I'll call this 4 plane. To relocate the coordinate system, I'll select reselect. I'll let my cursor lock on to the lower left corner of this face. And then I'll select OK. I think this plane, yeah, I need to rename this. I'll rename it. So rename, we'll call this 3 plane. So 4 plane, that's the active plane. I'll go back to levels, make sure that the 4 level is active. From here, we'll draw on some construction geometry. I'll go to wireframe, line, endpoint. I'll lock on to the midpoint of this edge. I'll lock on to the midpoint of this edge, left click. From here, I'll select OK. I'm going to create some letters. I'll go to wireframe, create letters. I'll change it to 4. I'll left click off of the part to create the letters. And then I'll select OK to exit the create letters tool. I need to move these letters to the midpoint of this construction line. I'll go to Transform, Dynamic. I'll select the letters. I'll select End Selection. I'll lock onto the center point of the selected entities. I'll select the sphere. The letters are now attached to my cursor. I'll let my cursor lock onto the midpoint of the construction line. When I see it snap into position, left click, and then I'll select OK. I can delete the construction geometry, and then I can clear the colors. From here, we'll create a plane on this top face. I'll go to the level manager. I'll make the top level the active level. I'll go back to the plane manager. I'll create a new plane from geometry. I'll select this face. Now I'm going to make the x-axis parallel with the front plane. If you're not seeing that, just scroll through the different options. And option 1 is the one I want. I'll select OK. We'll call this top plane. To reposition it, I'll select Reselect. I'll let my cursor lock on to the lower left corner of that face. From here, I'll select OK. I'll need to draw in some construction geometry. I'll go to Wireframe, Line Endpoint. Let my cursor lock onto the midpoint of this edge. And I'll lock onto the midpoint of this edge. From here, I'll select OK. To create the letters, I'll go to Wireframe, Create Letters. Open top, and then I'll click off of the part to place letters. And then I'll select OK to exit the tool. I'll use the Dynamic Transform tool. I'll go to Transform, Dynamic. I'll select the top letters. I'll select End Selection. From here, I'll let my cursor lock on to the center point. I'll select the sphere. With the letters attached to my cursor, I'll let my cursor lock on to the midpoint of this construction line, left click. Then I'll select OK to exit the tool. Delete the construction line, and then clear the colors. Right click, clear colors. Now, if I look at it from an isometric view, I'm going to flip the part over. I'm going to rotate it about the y-axis 180 degrees. What you can do on your keyboard, hold the Y key down, and then press the center scroll wheel down and move your mouse. So we're rotating about the y-axis. This face is facing upward, or it appears to be facing up. In the level manager, make the bottom level the active level. Go to the planes manager. We're going to create a new plane. New plane from geometry. If I select this face, I'm going to have the x-axis parallel with this edge going the other direction. So I'll change the orientation. So now X is going this way. Now remember, the letters read from left to right. So look at the x-axis. X0 would be the beginning, and then it's going to read to the right in the positive X. From here, I'll select OK. We'll call this one bottom plane. To reposition the coordinate system, I'll select Reselect. With the coordinate system attached to my cursor, I'll lock onto the lower left corner of that surface or that face. I'll select OK. I need to draw in some construction geometry, so I'll go to Wireframe, Line Endpoint. I'll lock on to the midpoint of this edge and then the midpoint of this edge. Select OK. From here, I'll go to create letters. We'll call this one bottom. Click off in the graphics area away from the part, and then I'll select OK to exit the tool. To reposition or move the bottom label, I'll go to Transform, Dynamic. I'll window select the bottom label or the bottom letters. I'll select End Selection. I'll let my cursor lock onto the center point. I'll select the sphere. With the letters attached to my cursor, I'll now lock onto the midpoint of this construction line. I see it snap into position. Left click. I'll select OK. I'll delete the construction geometry and I'll clear the colors. Right click, clear colors. I believe we've created all of the labels that we need for this project. In the Planes Manager, I'll select the top plane, the very top default plane. I'll select equals. That makes the current coordinate system, current construction plane, and current tool plane all associated with the top. I can right click, isometric, right click, fit, right click, unzoom 80%. And this would be a good time for me to save my work. File, save. And if I hit Alt F9, or if I go to View, I can make the coordinate system visible or invisible. And at this time, I'll make it invisible. So this is going to finish or complete the modeling portion of this project. In the next video or in the next lecture, I'm going to go over how to do or how to create the tool paths to engrave these letters into this part.